Amos, the unheeded voice that foretold destruction. I often find myself saying that, sometimes, God speaks, and no one listens. And what is most terrifying is that when his silence descends, it is not because he has given up on us, it is because we have given up on hearing. Just imagine, the creator of the universe choosing someone completely ordinary, a shepherd, a man who merely wanted to live in peace, and placing him before kings and priests to announce a truth no one wanted to hear. I was that man. And the irony was that the more the people claimed to be blessed, the further they were from God. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? How can someone believe they are well when everything inside is twisted? But that is exactly how my mission began, and perhaps, in some way, this story is also about you. I remember that day as if I could still feel the sand of the hills beneath my feet. The sun was rising slowly, and there was a calm in the air so natural that I almost believed nothing could take me away from my routine, tending the sheep, fixing a fence, checking the sycamore trees. It was a simple life, without titles, without deference. And it was precisely in that silence, in the middle of the most common work in the world, that something heavy and urgent settled in my chest, not a voice I could point to with my finger, but a certainty that trembled in my gut. Go. Speak. Immediately, I wanted to argue. Who would listen to me? I was not even a prophet. I had calloused hands, not an elegant scroll. This is the first lie most of us tell ourselves when we feel a calling. We believe the call requires a resume, not courage. Have you ever had that feeling? That small, almost timid call that you try to extinguish with work, with distraction, with the opinions of others? We have a ready list of excuses. I'm not educated, I don't have time, no one will take me seriously, what if I fail? These excuses are a comfortable shield, until a day comes when the shield turns into a prison. I knew this fear intimately. For hours, I stood still in the field, holding my staff, looking up at the sky, trying to negotiate with God. I thought about my sheep, my livelihood, the look on people's faces when I returned without a clear answer. And the raw truth, the fear of what others will think weighs more heavily than the certainty that something needs to be said. But then something paradoxical occurred. The longer I waited to feel ready, the clearer the weight on my heart became. The calling did not allow for procrastination. It was as if a line was drawn, either you take the step, or you continue to deceive yourself. And when I finally left Tico and went north, I did not go with prepared speeches, I went with the need to speak the truth. Obedience was born before eloquence. And this is essential. If you wait to perfectly master the words before acting, you will miss the moment when the word could have changed someone's life, perhaps your own. There is a common objection I hear, but the Bible is difficult to interpret. What if I am mistaken? That is legitimate. Not everything we feel is the divine voice, our own desires also whisper. The practical way to discern, which I myself used, was simple and repeatable. First, silence, being alone, without screens, without other people's stories for a few hours. Second, checking for coherence, was the feeling aligned with what I knew to be just, merciful, and honest. Third, testing it small, tell one trusted person, observe the reaction, and refine. You do not need an oracle, you need honesty and courage. Many fail to act due to spiritual perfectionism and lose the chance to do concrete good. And how does that apply today? Think of something every day. You see an injustice at work, a colleague being excluded, a customer being cheated, and you think, that's not my business. Amos's logic is the reverse. When God called me, it was not to open an academic debate, it was to raise my voice against what was clearly wrong. So, the practical application is direct. Start with small, specific steps. If you felt a call to speak about ethics in your environment, write it down. If you feel you should help a neighboring family, pay them a visit. If it is a matter of faith and you fear ridicule, start with a small group, 3 people, a reading circle, a weekend gathering. The goal is not applause, it is faithfulness. Let me tell you something that happened to me, which changed the way I understand being called. One afternoon, shortly after accepting that I would speak in Samaria, I stopped at a crossroads before entering the city. There was an old woman, carrying a broken basket. She asked me for water. In seconds, I could have continued, ashamed of my own insecurity about what I was going to say in the public square. But stopping for that simple gesture was like a rehearsal for what would come next. I understood that the calling was not just to proclaim grandiose sentences, it was to wipe away a tear, correct a balance scale, give a voice to those who had none. Giving water to that woman prepared me to give words to those who suffered. Her reaction, a smile so pure it drove away my certainties of fear, was the first confirmation that I was not alone in this mission. Since then, every small act has reminded me, practical courage begins in discreet gestures. You might ask, what if I speak, and no one changes? I know how that question hurts. When I arrived in Samaria and raised my voice, some people listened out of curiosity, others ridiculed me. There is a real pain in being despised. But there is also a greater truth: the seed that falls on hard ground may germinate later, at a time you will not see. Acting does not guarantee popularity, it guarantees fidelity. And, in daily practice, it means accepting the cost of disapproval for something greater: justice, truth, mercy. Now, I want you to do an exercise with me for 3 days. Spend 20 minutes a day in total silence, no phone, no music, just you and a sheet of paper. Ask yourself, what is crooked within me? What can I fix? How can I serve today? Write down the answers, do not judge them, just write. At the end of the 3rd day, choose one small action that responds to one of those answers and do it. Come back here and tell me what happened. Why does this work? Because silence removes the fog of excuses, writing organizes the impulse, action transforms feeling into habit. Scientifically, and I do not need to cite an article now, we know that practices of silence and writing increase mental clarity and reduce anxiety, making courageous decisions much more likely. It is not mysticism, it is applied common sense. Remember, you do not need a cathedral of arguments to obey. Sometimes the calling appears inside a rural routine, and you are invited to leave it. The difference between staying and going is made by small, repeated acts, leaving fear on the bank and crossing to the place where words become a bridge. I crossed. My voice was not polished, my hands were not delicate, but there was something there that made me stand firm, the conviction that being faithful to what you feel is a way to honor what has been entrusted to you. If you hear that weight on your heart, do not treat it as a false alarm, treat it as a compass. When I arrived in Samaria, the contrast struck me like a hot, heavy wind. The hills of Tekoa were behind me, and before me rose palaces covered in ivory, bustling markets, and altars laden with gold. The kingdom of Israel seemed prosperous, vibrant, confident. But you only had to walk a few yards beyond the wide avenues to see what was hidden beneath the shine: starving children, forgotten widows, indebted laborers, selling the little they had to survive. At every corner, an empty prayer. Beneath every hymn, a stifled injustice. And there, in the heart of what they called blessing, I saw the symptom of a spiritual disease that still destroys many people today: the illusion that material prosperity is a sign of divine approval. The scene deeply troubled me. The priests wore fine clothes, raised their hands in the temples, and sang long hymns, but the echo that came back was not the sound of worship, it was emptiness. And I, a simple man, looked at all of it and thought, how can the people feel so close to God, yet so far from justice? Perhaps you, too, have asked yourself that question. How many times do we see someone who seems to have everything: success, comfort, recognition, but lives with a dry heart, without purpose, without truth? And the worst, how many times are we the ones who confuse religiosity with faith, appearance with essence? In those days, people believed that God was pleased with grand rituals, luxurious offerings, and melodious songs. But I began to realize that he was more interested in the small attitudes outside the temple. What did he see in the eyes of the cheated poor person? What did he hear in the voice of the ignored orphan? It was there, in the forgotten corners, that his presence manifested itself. And that is why my words began to change. I was not there to flatter kings or to confirm comfortable beliefs. I was there to say what no one wanted to hear, that worship without justice is just noise. Once, I walked through a market and saw a merchant altering the weight on the scale. He smiled, offering pure wheat, but I saw the grains mixed with dust, with scraps, with garbage. Beside him, a widow counted her last coins, trying to buy a handful of food for her children. The man cheated her with the same tranquility as someone saying a prayer. And in that moment, an indignation burned within me. I approached and said, "The Lord hates dishonest scales." He laughed, thinking I was just another moralist from the desert. But I was not speaking for myself. I was speaking for a God who sees what no one else sees. And that laugh remained etched in my memory, because I realized that the most dangerous sin is not declared wickedness, it is smiling indifference. How many times does this still repeat today? How many times does profit become more important than life? How many times is success built on the exploitation of others? You can change the scenery, swap the ancient robes for modern suits, but the essence is the same, greed disguised as a blessing. And perhaps Amos's call, so long ago, still echoes here, in corporations, in churches, in hearts. Because what destroys a society is not the poverty of some, but the moral blindness of many. I remember when I spoke before a crowd. People applauded when I condemned Israel's enemies, but silence fell heavily when I said, "You who crush the poor and build luxurious houses, you will not dwell in them." I saw fear in some eyes, contempt in others. They expected a speech of victory, and they heard a diagnosis of hypocrisy. And is it not like that even today? We want to hear that everything will be all right, that God will prosper us, but we forget that He is a God who demands righteousness. We want the promises, but we ignore the price. Some call me a radical. But tell me, how can there be moderation in the face of injustice? When you see a system that benefits few and oppresses many, silence is complicity. And perhaps this is the lesson I learned in the streets of Samaria. God is not impressed by the volume of our prayers, but by the coherence of our actions. In many moments, I myself doubted if it was worth continuing. People called me crazy, a troublemaker. But in every distressed face I saw, in every mother trying to feed a child, I felt that I could not stop. Because when the human being ignores the pain of others, they have already begun to die inside. And that kind of death has no grave, it has a routine. To make all this clear, I used an image that still moves me today: let justice roll down like a river, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Because justice cannot be an isolated act, a Sunday good deed. It needs to flow, like a river that never dries up. And if it does not flow from the soul, no religion can replace it. The temples can be beautiful, the songs impeccable, but if the heart is not upright, everything is empty noise. A modern scholar might call this moral dissonance, this difference between what we say we believe and what we actually practice. And there is research that shows, people who live in contradiction between faith and conduct have higher levels of anxiety and dissatisfaction. Science has only confirmed what God had already said centuries before: there is no peace where there is hypocrisy. But I also learned not to speak only with anger. One day, a woman sought me out after a sermon. She said she had lied to maintain a commercial privilege, and since then, she had not slept. She wept. I listened to her in silence. Sometimes, denunciation opens wounds, but it also liberates. She went home, returned what she had cheated, and started over. Some time later, she sent me a message: her store was prospering again, but now with peace. Justice is not punishment, it is healing. Think about it, perhaps what is missing in your life is not luck, but integrity. Perhaps what you call lack of blessing is just the echo of a river that stopped flowing inside you. And the challenge I leave is simple, but transformative: for 7 days, practice justice in small things. Do not cheat on the change. Do not spread a lie. Help someone you could easily ignore. Do this without expecting recognition. And observe what happens to your conscience. Justice is the language that God speaks fluently. When you practice it, even his silence becomes an answer. This is what I learned in the squares of Samaria. Between the cries of the merchants and the prayers of the hypocrites, true worship begins when the temple closes, and the heart remains open. There was a day when the air felt heavier than ever. The sun beat down on the stones of the temple at Bethel, and the people's murmur formed a dense mass of distrust and provocation. I was there, before faces that looked at me with contempt, some curious, others indignant. And in their midst, Amaziah, the priest, the man who represented the kingdom's official religion. He could no longer bear to hear my words. His gaze carried the arrogance of those who believe they have a monopoly on the truth. He approached, firm, with that rehearsed calm of those who consider themselves owners of the faith, and said, "Go away, prophet. Go back to Judah. You have no place here in Israel." There were seconds of silence. I felt the dust beneath my feet and my heart racing. I wanted to retreat, to go back to the field, to the pasture, to the familiar sound of the sheep. But there was something inside me that would not let me yield. Fear visited me, but it did not dominate me. Then I looked into his eyes and said what still echoes within me today, "I am not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet. I am a herdsman, a dresser of sycamore trees." But the Lord took me from following the flock and said, "Go and prophesy to my people Israel." Those words came out like thunder. I did not prepare them. They were born from the depths of my soul, and, in that instant, I realized the true meaning of courage. It is not the absence of fear, it is faithfulness to the purpose even when fear is screaming inside you. I was a nobody before the great ones, but I spoke for the one who is greater than all of them. And that is enough. Amaziah laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He tried to discredit me, to call me a fanatic, a disturber of the peace. And how many times does this happen even today? How many people are silenced because their words inconvenience those who live in the shadow of power? We live in a time when what is right is called intolerance and what is wrong is embellished with beautiful speeches. Being a prophet was never comfortable, and it still is not. I learned that speaking the truth hurts, first those who hear, then those who speak. Because the weight of responsibility is real. On many nights, alone, I questioned myself, is it worth continuing, if no one wants to listen? But there is one answer that does not change: when God gives you a mission, giving up is also a form of disobedience. And I knew that if I kept silent, I would be complicit in the silence that kills. I remember a specific scene. After that confrontation with Amaziah, I walked through the streets of Samaria and saw people avoiding me. It was as if I carried a contagious burden. No one wanted to associate with someone who speaks what is uncomfortable. One woman, however, approached me cautiously. She handed me a piece of bread and said softly, "Your words frighten me, but they also wake me up." And that was enough to renew my strength. The truth can be rejected by 1,000, but if it awakens even one, it is worth the effort. There is an inevitable similarity between that moment and what we experience today. Look around you. Who has the courage to confront error when it is dressed in authority, in status, in religion, in ideology? Many prefer approval over integrity. And, subtly, they become slaves to their own convenience. The fear of losing what we have is often what prevents us from being who we should be. It was then that I began to understand, God did not call me to be accepted, He called me to be true. And the truth, when spoken with faith, is more powerful than any crown. Martin Luther King Jr. understood this centuries later. He also faced the Amaziahs of his time, religious and political leaders who preferred the peace of silence to the pain of justice. He lost his tranquility, was imprisoned, was persecuted, and still continued to speak. He knew the same thing I learned in the streets of Samaria: there is no power more transformative than courage guided by love and faith. But do not think that this courage is born ready-made. It grows in the friction of doubt. Even I, before every speech, felt my stomach turn, my hands sweat. Courage is a spiritual muscle, it only gets stronger with use. And perhaps this is the great test of every generation: choosing between the comfort of omission and the risk of truth. The Bible says that faith without works is dead, but I tell you, faith without courage is mute. And here is a practical reflection: in your work, in your family, in your circle of friends, how many times have you seen something wrong and kept silent to avoid conflict? How many times did you prefer to preserve your image over preserving your integrity? We all do this at some point, but the challenge is to start breaking that pattern. Try, in the coming days, to practice what I call compassionate courage. Speak the truth, but with love. Correct, but with empathy. Denounce the error, but with the intention of restoring, not destroying. Courage is not brutality, it is lucidity with purpose. One night, after another rejected sermon, I sat alone on a hill and looked at the city lights. I felt exhausted, small, defeated. That is when a thought struck me like a silent blow: you do not speak to convince, you speak to fulfill. And there I understood, the outcome is not my responsibility, obedience is. The seed sown may seem lost, but God knows where it will germinate. Since then, every word of mine became a prayer and a sword at the same time. I no longer measured the strength of the reactions, only the fidelity of the message. What the world calls failure, God often calls a mission accomplished. And that perception changes everything. Therefore, if you are facing resistance for being faithful to your values, if you feel alone for following what you believe is right, know that you are in good company. Every prophet, every righteous person, every human being who decided to live with truth has felt this weight. And the secret is simple: do not give up. The voice that falls silent out of fear dies with time, but the voice that resists lives forever. Amaziah tried to silence me, but my story is still being told centuries later. His power ended, his temple crumbled, but the word I spoke remains alive. And this is what I want you to carry in your heart: those who speak for truth do not need a stage, they need conviction. And when your conviction is rooted in God, no opposing voice can silence you. After so long shouting truths that few wanted to hear, I realized there was something even harder than announcing judgment. It was speaking about hope to a people who no longer believed in it. People were tired. The rich lived in illusion, and the poor, in despair. I could feel in the eyes of many that emptiness that arises when faith seems to have expired. And it was in that scenario, of disbelief, resistance, and spiritual ruins, that God showed me something unexpected: even His judgment is a form of mercy. He does not destroy to punish, He corrects to restore. I was alone, in prayer, when the vision came. I saw an old tent, torn and fallen, the tent of David. The wind shook it, and for a moment, I thought it would collapse completely. But then I heard a firm voice: in that day, I will raise up the fallen tent of David. I will repair its breaches. That gave me chills. After so many harsh messages, hearing about restoration was like feeling the coolness of rain after years of drought. God was showing me that behind every judgment, there was a stubborn love, a desire for reconstruction. I understood, that hope is not a prize for the strong, it is the remedy for the broken. The people around me thought everything was lost, but God wanted to remind them that nothing is irreparable when He decides to raise it up again. Perhaps you know what that is like: looking at your life and seeing ruins, destroyed dreams, broken relationships, faded faith. And maybe you think, there is no way out. But that is often where God begins. He does not rebuild upon victories, He rebuilds upon shards. I remember one day, after a sermon, a young man sought me out. He was trembling. He said he had cheated many people, that he had strayed from everything that was just, and that he no longer saw a reason to live. I looked at him and saw all of Israel in that face. And I said something that I repeat today to those who listen to me: as long as there is breath, there is promise. He wept, knelt, and there, without spectacle, a new story was born. That is how God works: He does not replace people, He transforms them. But there is a detail that few notice: restoration comes after the truth. God does not rebuild lies. And that is why, even as I spoke of hope, my words remained sharp. The same God who promises to raise up, demands repentance. The same love that welcomes, also confronts. And this is what the modern world tries to forget. They want comfort without confrontation, blessing without change. But true hope only flourishes in clean soil. I also needed to be broken to understand this. After so many speeches, there was a time of silence. No one called me, no one listened to me. I returned to walking alone through the fields, feeling the same solitude as when it all began. It was there, in the silence, that I realized, sometimes God is silent to see if we learn to hear Him outside the noise. And it was in that emptiness that peace began to be born. His silence was not rejection, it was maturation. How many times have you felt the same? You pray, you seek answers, and all you receive is a heavy silence. The temptation is to give up. But I can guarantee you, God's silence is a language. It is as if He is saying, I am still here, but now you are the one who needs to look for me. Faith, after all, is not the absence of doubt, it is the decision to continue believing even without guarantees. And the most impressive thing is that when God speaks again, He does not just repair what was broken, He improves what existed before. The promise I received was like this: fertile fields, vineyards full of fruit, families reunited, cities rebuilt. Justice running like a river. An entire people rediscovering purpose. And this vision was not just for Israel, it was for everyone who, one day, got lost and needs to start over. Today, when I look at the world, I see that the human heart remains the same. The clothes, the technologies, the temples have changed, but the wounds are identical. There is still a hunger for justice, there is still a thirst for meaning. There are still people trying to fill with success what only the truth can satisfy. And the message God made me carry remains alive: judgment is not the end, it is the beginning. Pain is not punishment, it is a warning. Falling is not failure, it is a starting point. So, if you feel that your life is crooked, that the wall of your faith is cracked, remember the plumb line. I saw the plumb line in God's hands, the instrument that measures alignment, that shows how much something has deviated. And guess what? He did not throw the wall away. He measured it to fix it. That taught me that God does not reject us for being crooked, He just reveals where we need to straighten up. Now, let me propose something practical, a challenge. For 7 days, choose one small act of reconstruction. It can be asking someone for forgiveness, correcting an injustice you caused, dedicating time to someone you neglected, or simply returning to speaking with God. Do this intentionally, like someone who wants to align their heart with His guide. And observe what happens. Maybe it seems small at first, but divine restoration always begins in humble gestures. There is modern research on happiness and well-being that says people who practice reconciliation, asking and offering forgiveness, have higher levels of emotional peace and mental health. I do not need science to know this, but it is curious how it ends up confirming what God had already revealed centuries ago. Forgiveness and justice restore not only the soul but the body as well. And if you allow me one final thought, hope is not an emotion, it is a decision. Just as I decided to keep speaking when everyone told me to be quiet, you can also decide to believe when everything seems lost. Because God does not change. He still raises up what is fallen, still restores what was destroyed, still transforms tears into seeds. I saw a rebellious people hear hard words and, even so, be loved. I saw the sky open over cracked ground. And I learned that God's justice never comes without redemption. Therefore, if you hear this message today and feel a tight heart, it is not the end, it is the invitation to start anew. And when that new beginning arises, remember to be grateful. Not because everything went well, but because you discovered that even contrary winds can lead you exactly where God wanted you to be. And if there is one thing I want you to take away from this story, it is this: God does not choose the perfect, He awakens the willing. Amos was an ordinary man, calloused hands, a simple gaze, a quiet life, but he became a voice that echoed through the centuries because he had the courage to obey. True transformation begins exactly there, when you understand that you do not need to be extraordinary to be part of something eternal, you just need to say, yes. So, if this message made you reflect, keep it within you. Perhaps your yes is the beginning of a change that the world around you needs. But do not stop here. The next video appearing on the screen will take you one step higher, deeper into wisdom, and closer to the version God planned for you. Continue this journey with me, become 1% better than you are now. Thank you for staying until the end, for opening your heart and walking with me through this story. I'll see you in the next video, because wisdom is a ladder, and the next step is already waiting for you.